Good evening and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Sanket Upadhyay. This is a special 60-minute edition where we are packing 3 debates for you right here on this show. Debate number 1, the government's 8 relief measures that have been announced today. This is the biggest economic step that has been taken since the Atmanirbhar package, which was announced, declared by the Prime Minister and then announced by Nirmala Sitharaman. The government wants us to believe that this is the first in the many steps that the government will take to provide economic relief. But the big question is, can these measures revive the growth story in India? That's going to be the basic point right here. 2 sectors of interest. One was, of course, hospitality, tourism, and the other was healthcare. We'll have experts on the show and we'll ask them this question: do they think that enough has been done? Story number 2, we're calling this the Kasaragod challenge. There is a war that has broken out over language between Karnataka and Kerala, so much so that now B.S. Yedurappa, the Karnataka Chief Minister, has shot off a letter to his Kerala counterpart saying that he has learnt that names of certain villages in Kasaragod, largely Kannada-speaking locality, those names are now being changed into Malayalam. That should not be done. This has become a huge bone of contention. And also debate number 3, political debate from Uttar Pradesh, a state that is going to polls. So Mayawati says she'll go it alone. Akhilesh says he will go it alone. Congress has no other option but to go it alone. There is an Owaisi factor also. He says that he'll contest on 11 seats. And then there are others. So Mayawati versus Akhilesh versus Congress versus Owaisi versus others. Are these the divided colors of UP's opposition to Yogi Adityanath? What does this mean politically for Yogi Adityanath with such a fractured opposition? So all that and much more right here on the show. But first, the economic stimulus that has been announced. 6.28 lakh crore rupees is the stimulus. But by the way, and this needs to be told upfront, 30% has already been announced of whatever the finance minister announced today. Government's 8 relief measures. Number 1, a 1.1 lakh crore loan guarantee scheme for COVID affected sectors, 50,000 crores for health, 60,000 for others, 1.5 lakh crores emergency credit line guarantee scheme, 88,000 crores and 33,000 for insurance cover for 2 export sectors, 15,000 crores for public health, about 19,000 crore to complete the broadband link in each village, 14,000 odd crore for additional subsidy for fertilizers. Now, as we are saying, some of these measures have already been announced. For instance, 97,631 crore for power distribution reforms and about 93,000 crores for free food grains till the 21st of November. So, the critics are going to say that this is repackaging, but the point is certain relief measures have been announced. Are they enough, and can they help in reviving the Indian growth story? Let's quickly go across to our guest. Jean Drèze, economist, is now with us. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Alok Vajpayee is the CEO and co-founder of Ixigo. Thank you very much, Alok, for joining us. Mr. Subhash Goyal, President of the Confederation of Tourism Professionals of India and Chairman of STIC Travels, is also with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Goyal. Sanchita Mukherjee is a Senior Private Wealth Manager, is also with us. Thank you very much, Ms. Mukherjee. Mr. Goyal, I want to begin with you first because the tourism sector found prominent mention in the Finance Minister's speech. Do you think it's enough?
I think it's too late and too little.
Okay.
Why it's too late? Because about 10 million people are already without jobs. A few thousand companies and small people have become already, bankrupt. Loans are meaningless at this stage, particularly when you're talking about tourist guides who have had no business for the last, 1.5 years because there are no foreign tourists coming. What loan will they take? At least 1 lakh rupees per government recognized tourist guide, you can give them a grant. No, we will not give grants. It's disaster management. In disaster management, why can't you give grants? The whole world is doing it. Why can't you? Secondly, we were hoping that SEIs will be announced at 10%. Nothing has been done. If you want to talk about visas, good, but it's lip service. Because if you're not allowing foreign international airlines to come in, and you're not announcing a date for e-tourist visas, then it is just notional. Because as it is, no one is traveling, and people who will travel, they can afford to pay $20 or $30. But who needs the money is the small tour operator, the tourist guide, the tourist taxi driver, the tourist bus driver. These are the people, if the gurdwaras were not there, would die of hunger. So we need time bound. You announce a date for international flights, at least for those people who have received both the vaccines. Today we've been traveling to Africa with the yellow fever vaccine. Why can't we accept people? The whole world is opening up. Those who have been vaccinated, all our neighboring countries, even European countries are opening up. Russia has opened up, Ukraine has opened up, a lot of other countries are opening up, UAE is opening up, Thailand is opening up, all these countries have opened up, Mauritius has opened up. Why can't we? So make a restriction. The hotels have all the protocols. In India, more than 300 million people have been vaccinated. So I think it's high time that the government becomes serious. And if they want to prevent the third wave, then they have to be very strict on protocols of people without masks. They should be fined or imprisoned. And why are we allowing Char Dham? We allowed, Kumbh Mela, and we saw the result of the second wave. So let us, have a coordinated effort of preventing this. Prevention is better than cure. And I'm sure unless and until you restart the economy, more people are going to die of economic starvation than will die of COVID-19. So we need to have a fixed date for the e-visas, for those who have been vaccinated, and a fixed date for international flights, at least to those countries which we have an air bubble. That's all my take.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's very interesting. Your take is very interesting. You've summed it up beautifully, what you feel represents the concerns of your sector. Before I come to you, Mr. Bajpai, I want to go across to Mr. Drez. Mr. Drez, we're not only talking about specific sectors. Of course, the focus was very clearly, number one, on healthcare, and number two, on tourism. These seem to be the top 2 points of focus areas as far as the government is concerned. Do you think in these focus areas, the government has addressed the issue?
Sanket, before coming to these specific sectors, I think we must see the larger picture.
Sure.
We must understand that India is going through an unprecedented humanitarian crisis, unprecedented at least for the post-independence period. If you look at the recent analysis of death registration data for the states where the data are available, and you extrapolate that for the whole country, it is clear that there have already been millions of excess deaths in the last few months compared to the pre-COVID period. Now, nothing like that has happened in the post-independence period or even in the last 100 years, except perhaps with the Bengal famine of 1943. Now, we don't really know how much of these millions of excess deaths are COVID deaths and how many are non-COVID deaths, but it's almost certain that a substantial proportion are non-COVID deaths related to unemployment, poverty, undernutrition, and so on and so forth. And even the COVID deaths would have been magnified by the fact that the population is enfeebled. So in this situation, we must not only help business, which is what today's so-called relief measures, I would not even call them relief measures, I would call them business subsidies. That is what they are. Okay. They will help a small number of poor people, but they will mainly help business. We need direct support for poor people. And last year, there was not much, but at least there was some support for people as well as for business. But now we're only supporting business. I think that is absolutely unacceptable. We need to help people directly, not in a very roundabout way.
But Jean Drez, I want to understand this from you. I've spoken to a lot of people in the government, and they say, and you've heard this, you've heard the Prime Minister also say this, that when businesses sustain, then they will create jobs. thus creating opportunities, and thus the cycle of the economy will roll or move.
Sanket, you can equally say that when you help people, when you put money in their pockets, you are also helping business, and you are helping the viable businesses that are doing something useful for people. When you go mainly through the route of loan guarantees, which is what the bulk of today's money is all about, is basically loan guarantees for businesses.
Correct.
You don't really know who you are helping, especially when the banking sector is in such a mess and when there is no transparency whatsoever in the banking sector. You know, you're helping some small businesses that employ people, but you're also helping a lot of businesses that may be zombie farms, corporate sector, and so on and so forth. And very little of that is going to reach poor people. So I think we really cannot do it that way. Let me give you an example. If you give a subsidy, for example, we are talking of the tourism industry. Think of a small hotel in a small town employing maybe 10 people, you know, as waiters and so on, security guards, spending actually most of its money on other things, on capital and so on. Now you give a credit guarantee to that hotel. How much of that is going to reach these employees that you really want to help? First of all, the first thing that the business is likely to do is to repay the debts that they have accumulated in the last few months because they had no customers. So who are you helping? You are helping the creditors. The creditor could be a Banya, it could be a private bank, it could be a public sector bank. If it's a public sector bank, that means that the money goes right back to the government. You know, how much of it is going to help the poor person? So I would say rather, let's have broad-based support schemes for the informal sector as a whole. Just imagine what good you could do just by raising the Narega wages, which have been frozen in real terms for the last 12 years. So it's overdue anyway. It wouldn't cost that much, and you would reach 50 million, at least, Narega workers right away. You know, that's a much more effective way of helping people, and that would also help businesses, especially the businesses that deserve to be helped.
Okay. Before I come to you, Ms. Mukherjee, because, you know, Jean Drèze has raised a number of crucial issues, and I would like to take your opinion on that as well. But very quickly, Mr. Bajpai, coming back to, you know, your sector, because the reason why I lay a lot of stress to sectors today is because in her speech, in her press conference, the two core areas that the government attempted to address was, of course, hospitality, tourism, as well as healthcare. Now, we'll have a totally different debate on healthcare, but Mr. Bajpai, as far as your sector is concerned, do you think these steps will help, or what else could have been done?
Well, look, these supply side measures definitely will help, even though they're coming a bit late in the day. But I think they're not enough, right? You know, we've got to also figure out what is really ailing this sector. Till the demand does not come back, right? I mean, even if you look at the numbers today, we are at about 140,000 daily passengers per flights. You know, we're not even at 30%, 35% of pre-COVID levels. And I think if we want to see people get on planes again, get on trains again, start visiting places, first of all, we have to solve the problem of confidence. And the only way to do that is to vaccinate at a velocity that brings, you know, 50 to 60% of the country fully vaccinated, you know, by the end of the year, which I think at this point, you know, we will need to ramp up our pace in order to get there. I think the second thing is that on the supply side, we may have been able to bring some level of confidence, but the reality is a lot of the smaller, you know, travel agents, smaller travel guides, you know, the activity providers in places like Kerala, etc., you know, have suffered a lot, and some of them might not even have survived this already. But what we can do now is on the demand side, like Jean Drèze said, we can put some money into people's pockets, right? Through, you know, perhaps tax credits, right? So if somebody actually takes a vacation and spends 20,000 rupees on it, can he actually get 5 or 10,000 rupees worth of tax credits, right? The common man can actually then at least save something, you know, in next year's taxes. And I think that's what some countries in the West have actually started to implement. And we believe that those kind of measures that help the demand side come back will have far greater impact on this sector than these limited supply side measures.
Okay, Ms. Mukherjee, I guess most of what people have said has to do with the government addressing supply side concerns, supply side measures. We saw that loan addresses this function, right? But what about increasing demand? Now, as I've spoken to many representatives in the government, they look at this as a classic difference of opinion between two sections of people. One who feel that there should be some amount of dole or a financial direct aid, or there should be loan. Mr. Drez, I want to come back to you. Would you like to take that one? The basic difference between the approach, a dole versus a loan. How would you address this?
I think as far as people are concerned, working people are concerned, what they need is resources, whether it's food or whether it's cash, more than the loan. Because they have already taken debts, they have been struggling now for more than a year. So I think they need resources, and there are ways of doing it. It's not that difficult, even if it was just a repeat of what has been done last year, which is not very much, but at least it's better than nothing. I mean, there were cash transfers through pensions, through maternity benefits, through the JDY accounts. There was expansion of Narega budget. There were also the food subsidies, which have been repeated this year, but only for food grain, and partly because the warehouses, the godowns are bursting at the seams. So in any case, the government has to release that food in one way or another. What about pulses? Last year there were pulses, 1 kg per household for a few months. That does help poor people who are really struggling to feed their families. So these are the sorts of measures that I think we need today. Not to say that we should not help business at all. I think there are certain things that can be done for business, especially for small business. But there has to be a balance, and the big priority has to be to help poor people. We cannot get away from that. I would say even if you have to expropriate the rich, do it. But you cannot let people struggle the way they are.
Sure. Ms. Mukherjee is, I believe, now back with us. I was asking you this question on us having at least attempted to address supply side concerns. But what about the, basically creating the demand? Now there is, of course, one philosophy that there'll be employment. Once you give a loan, right, there will be factories that will start working, that will create employment. Employment will lead to, people getting money, and then that money will be spent back into the market.
Right. Thank you so much. I'd just like to make a small correction here. So I'm a senior finance professional, not a senior private wealth manager. And to address your question, no worries. To address your question very directly, let's understand, when we had the first wave, there was a very strict national lockdown, right? When we had the second wave, the lockdown was there, very much implemented, but it was open in parts of the economy, right? So the government took care in terms of conserving demand to that extent. Now, I knew this question about US printing money, putting money into people's pockets and all of this would arise, and it seems to be the easiest solution to spur demand. A lot of times that is not the case, actually, what we do witness. Because I would like to leave you with some food for thought. For example, if you have a 16,000 crore budget and you're making 1,000 kilometers of roads a day, and increase the budget to 32,000 crore in pump money, do you think you'd be able to do 2,000 kilometers of roads a day? No, there is also something known as an execution capability and the ability to absorb such a demand from the economy. Point number one. Secondly, I think what really stood out to me in these announcements were not just the healthcare and the tourism. I think the finance minister looked at various schemes in terms of microfinance lending to the urban poor, microfinance lending to the rural poor, extending the emergency line for subsidies, list of things, fertilizer subsidy. In fact, what really stood out was India as a country. We have humongous wastage when it comes to food grains. So whilst we talk about printing money and distributing it, we never address the humongous amount of food grain wastage that happens. So the Prime Minister Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana actually addresses that. But you don't have to go around beyond your fiscal printing money. You can actually make effective use of the food grains
Sure.
which are stored in your granaries
Okay.
and distributed to the poor.
Okay, yeah, Ms. Mukherjee, some problem with your audio connection there, but I guess we got a sense of what you were saying. Thank you very much to the three of you. Let's just hope that there are more measures taken by the government as we go along, because this, as many people feel, even in the government, is not enough. This is not going to fix the economy immediately. Thank you very much to all of you all. Let's take a short break at this moment. When we come back, we'll talk about the Kasargod challenge, the big language war between two states. Why are two South Indian states fighting over language? We'll tell you all that and much more after a short break. Welcome back. So there is a big fight brewing between Karnataka as well as Kerala. First of all, let us tell you what has happened right now. Just a few moments ago, the Chief Minister of Karnataka, Mr. B.S. Yedurappa, has written this 2-page letter in which he says that he feels that the names of villages are being changed in the Kasargod district of Kerala. Right here, if you can see, he mentions that in the Kasargod district, names are being changed from Kannada sounding names to Malayalam sounding names, and this is being done by the local administration. There is a huge war. I mean, all through the day you had H.D. Kumaraswamy, the JDS, various members of the JDS also highlighting, but in the evening a chief minister wrote to the other chief minister where he said, and you read this paragraph, this is very significant, where he says, "I hope your kind self would oblige and make the Kannada speaking people of Kasargod and Manjeshwara happy by taking a decision to stall the process of changing the names of the aforementioned villages in Kasargod and Manjeshwara talukas in Kasargod district," in a way appealing that don't change these names. Now it's surprising because all this while we have heard various representatives of the Kerala government saying that this is not true, we are not changing any name. Where did this story come from? But then on the other hand, you have all Karnataka, top Karnataka politicians tweeting, writing letters, taking this very, very seriously. So if there is nothing happening on the ground, then why are politicians in Karnataka fuming? In fact, in the letter of the Chief Minister, in the first page, he actually gave the name changes, that this name has been changed to this Malayalam sounding name. Why is this happening? So let's quickly take a look at what is being said. Karnataka leaders have told the Kerala government, don't change Kannada names of villages. Karnataka leaders have objected to a plan, and that's the key word. As of this moment, it is a plan to change Kannada names of villages in Kasargod in Kerala. Whose plan is it? Politicians in Karnataka feel that Kerala politicians might be planning to change names. That's where the story stands as of this moment. No name change has actually happened on the ground. They say Karnataka Chief Minister B.S. Yedurappa has written to the Kerala Chief Minister saying that stall the process of changing names. The letter I showed you just a short while ago. H.D. Kumaraswamy also wrote to the Kerala Chief Minister early this morning saying, request you to halt the process in the name of linguistic harmony. Let there be linguistic harmony. Please don't change the names. Language is a huge issue, particularly in the South. For South Indian states, it's directly related to emotion, and in fact, there are political dividends also attached to a debate like this. Karnataka leaders have also told the Kerala government, this is of course from the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP MP has written to the Karnataka CM saying that they must immediately oppose anti-Kannada move. So he is from Mr. B.S. Yedurappa's party who's telling his chief minister, please stop this move. And this goes on and on, where you've got other Karnataka leaders. Karnataka Border Area Development Authority chairman has also written to the Kerala government. He says, don't change Kannada names of villages. He wrote a letter to the Chief Minister. All these letters are now in the public domain. He's of course the KBAD authority. He says local bodies are trying to change names of villages. Now note this very, very interesting trend. Every politician in Karnataka is not directly blaming the Kerala Chief Minister. Look at the word that they have used. In all letters, there is only one word that they seem to use. The pen doesn't seem to work. Local, that's the key word right here. Local bodies are trying to change the names. Then you've got other Kerala leaders who have, Karnataka leaders who have in fact spoken. We also spoke, by the way, to Kerala Minister, because it's very important to know the version of Kerala. So Kerala Minister, Mr. M.V. Govindan, has told NDTV that Kerala has no plans to make any such changes. So Kerala in a way trying to say that this is a non-story, this is not true. He says that there is no such plan to make any changes. Mr. PKD Nambiar as well as Tanveer Ahmed, PKD Nambiar is a political analyst, supports the BJP, and Mr. Tanveer Ahmed is a spokesperson of the JDS, is also with us. Mr. Ahmed, I'm going to come to you first. Now that Kerala representatives are on record to say that this is not true, we are not even changing anything, then what's the big deal? What has gone into politicians in Karnataka?
It's a good news, fantastic if at all they are not changing, because that is what Karnataka needed. Kasaragod, which is a bordering place from Karnataka, which has more than 35% of population which speaks Kannada. There is a population which speaks Tulu, there is a population which speaks Malayalam, and as well as in Mangalore we have a huge number of population which speaks Malayalam. The Karnataka Chief Minister, former Chief Minister S.D. Kumaraswamy, when we got the news that there is a rumor like this, because we are part of the Kerala government, we have 4 MLAs and a minister in the government. We requested on a very personal note to the Chief Minister, Honorable Chief Minister, Mr. Pinari Vijayan, and which he was absolutely not aware of it. But as you rightly said, that there was certain local bodies, especially the Congress MLA, whose I think his name is Jafar, if I am not wrong, of Kasaragod, there was a rumor which was going that Mangala was changed to Mangalam, Kumble was changed to Kumblam, and hence we requested. There is absolutely no political fight here. It was a request because to keep the linguistic harmony, as rightly said by the Honorable MP from Mysore, Mr. Pratap Simha. But however, I just want to tell you that there is a huge population of Malayalis who are successful businessmen here in Karnataka. Keeping that also in interest, good, you are doing a program. If at all nothing like this happens, there is going to be a harmony between Kannadigas and Malayalis, which is what we need.
Absolutely. Mr. A.N. Shamsir is also with us. He is the MLA and also a senior leader of CPM in Kerala. Mr. Shamsir, how would you respond? You have seen that letter after letter is being written by leaders in Karnataka from all political parties. That and if you must have seen the letter of the Chief Minister of Karnataka, he has even given out names, that these are the names that are being proposed to be changed into Malayalam. He gives about 10 odd names.
I'm astonished by hearing this news. No Malayalam channels or no Malayalam paper has so far reported this story. I am hearing this story for the first time. Look, we had no parochial approach. We are seeing in the state in a broader sense, not Karnataka or not Kerala. Look, Karnataka and Kerala is sharing the border in Kasaragod district. Look, Kerala, university festivals, school festivals, we are conducting literary items in Kannada. So we are promoting Kannada speaking people. We are studying, we are giving teaching education, we are giving education in Kannada medium also. Then why such issues are making by BJP government here? It's a deliberate approach to create a war between the two states, the neighboring states, the neighboring people who is staying in the neighboring districts.
Mr. Shamsi, you are saying that the BJP is doing this. By the way, this letter was first written by Mr. H.D. Kumaraswamy. Of course, Mr. Pratap Simha also brought it up. Are you very categorically saying that nothing of this sort is going to happen?
Yeah, I can say because last our assembly session has entered in the last week of June. Nobody has pointed out. Look, there is one MLA in the assembly. He used to take the swearing in Kannada language, in linguistic Kannada language. One Manjeshwaram MLA, he's a part of Muslim, he's a member of Indian Union Muslim League. The name was Ashraf. He has taken swearing in Kannada language, in linguistic Kannada language.
Mr. Shamsir, where is this coming from? You know, for the sitting Chief Minister of Karnataka to write a letter and in great detail giving out names of about 15 odd places, what their real name was and what the proposed changes. This is too detailed for it to be untrue. That's my only question.
Yeah. By being a Keralite, I can say it's a false story. And also from the government part.
No, how can it be false? The Chief Minister of Karnataka has written a letter, sir. It is not false. These letters are in the public domain.
Maybe he has given letter by under speculation. These all are maybe speculation. But as far as Kerala government is concerned, the Kerala government's cabinet number 2, you mentioned one name, Mr. M.V. Govindan Master. He's number 2 in the cabinet. He has already categorically mentioned there is no such plan from the Kerala government to change such names. How he got? He has to say before Mr. Honorable Chief Minister of Karnataka, Yediyurappa has to mention from where he got the news.
Okay, Mr. Nambiar, you are the closest at this moment to represent the view of the BJP. You have heard MLA Mr. Shamsir. He says that this is not true. Nothing of this sort is going to happen in Kerala. So if nothing is happening, if there is no such plan for the Chief Minister of Karnataka to write such a detailed letter listing out the name of the places and their proposed name change, where did he get this information from?
Sanket, as far as if the Kerala government is saying that it is not going to change and there is no plan, there was no plan, then it is absolutely very good. You must understand that the Kasaragod has got a multi-lingual society which speaks Tulu. I am very close to that place. I just 30 kilometers away from that particular place where I belong to. So it has got multiple languages. It is not only the Kannada, and there is a cultural fabric of that particular place. And most of the places you would also understand, which is generally taken from there's a famous temple, and along with that, the temple's name is taken as the village name in most of those places. So there have been some kind of a noises which has been happening from within the local leaders in that area, and there is also some kind of another element to it. There is a huge rise of Muslim population is coming up in Kasaragod district especially, and if you really look at it, the maximum number of ISIS people have also been gone from Kasaragod. So if there is something like this is taking place,
no, Mr. Nambiar, my only request will be that if you make an assessment, make sure you make that assessment with facts.
Absolute facts. There is nothing called.
No, what concrete evidence would you place for saying that there is a,
for an example,
there is a change in the demography?
I will give you one example. Saket, since you asked me a question, I will tell you. In the Manjeshwaram,
and what does that have to do with the change of proposed change, which Mr. Shamsir said is not even happening? What does that have to do with the change from Kannada to Malayalam?
That's precisely I am saying. It is not only just Kannada. As Mr. Tanveer Ahmed said, there is a Tulu language, which is more of like a vocal language which is spoken. There is a Kannada language. There are multi-languages which has been used in that particular area of about 30 kilometers in the bordering state.
Agreed. My question was, see, you gave me a Ram Kahani, Mr. Nambiar. My only point over here was, where did the Chief Minister of Karnataka get his information from? Because right now it appears as if all leaders in Karnataka right now want to score a one-up by being seen to be representing the Kannada cause. So whereas Kerala is saying, there is nothing to represent.
I think, Sanket, in my Ram Kahani, the first part, the first Kahani starts with H.D. Kumaraswamy. He is the one who has written the biggest letter first. The Chief Minister only followed. So unless and until there is no news, a Chief Minister and a former Chief Minister would not have been writing letters.
Okay, Mr. Shamsir, very quickly, Mr. Shamsir. So, Mr. Nambiar says, I'll come to you, Mr. Ahmed. I'll come to you, Mr. Shamsir.
It's time for me. I will express my view in 30 seconds.
Sure.
Look, these all are fake stories. This is a bigger plan played by Mr. Yediyurappa. because in the coming year there will be election in Karnataka. So they are encouraging such type of soil, son of soil.
And how about S.D. Kumaraswamy, Mr. Shamsir?
Yeah. Both of them are playing third-rate politics there.
S.D. Kumaraswamy, JDU is a part of your government, Shamsir. JDU is a part of your government.
I am agreeing with you. From where he got the news, he can speak with Kerala Chief Minister. Why, look, H.D. Kumaraswamy is not a part of not a part of the government in Karnataka. He is opposition leader. From while I am mentioning how dare
Mr. Nambiar, 1 minute. Let him speak, please. Yeah.
Look, Mr. Nambiar, show some patience. I keep quiet while you are speaking. Look, Yediyurappa is the Chief Minister of Karnataka. If he is writing such letter, he has to substantiate his stand from where he got the news. Kumaraswamy is not like that. He is an opposition leader. Both of them are playing not a game, pure politics. They want to gain something. That's why they are playing like this. But as a part of a government, I am a part of a government. I am an MLA for the ruling party. I can say no discussion has taken place in Kerala. No Malayalam.
But Mr. Shamsir, if you see the body of both these letters, they seem to acknowledge. And by the way, the local body representative has also written. He has also written a letter where he says that that there are certain local body members who may be thinking of changing this name.
The politicians should see the matter in a broader perspective. Unfortunately, Karnataka Chief Minister seen in a narrow-minded. That's why I mentioned it's a parochial approach. That's why they are giving letter. Look, Karnataka and Kerala earlier. South Canara was a part of Malabar.
No, Mr.
I belong to that place. Look,
I agree,
Canara.
Mr. Shamsir. 1 moment. Otherwise, it will become a very long, discourse in history. My only point is that if reservation has been placed on record by a leader of the opposition in a neighbouring state and the chief minister of a neighbouring state, both saying that certain local leaders may be or local bodies may be trying to do this. They are not saying Pinarayi Vijayan is changing the name or Mr. Shamsir is changing the name. Local bodies. Do you think it's worth investigating?
Chief Minister and opposition leader who is writing a letter to the other state chief minister, they should substantiate evidence. Local leader can raise any points. We are not giving ear to that local leaders' voices. As far as Kerala government is considered, the part number 2 in the cabinet, MV Govindan has clearly stated there is no such move. The story is totally true, false.
Okay, Mr. Tanveer Ahmed, you've heard from Mr. Shamsir. He says that this is pure politics being played by leaders in Karnataka because you want to prep for an upcoming election. And what more emotive than language? What is a far more emotive issue than language?
Firstly, Mr. Shamsir and Mr. Nambiar both are super excited. They are politicians. They need to really tone down their tune. Firstly, Mr. Nambiar, which he spoke about ISIS and all that nonsense. I think no person in the country would have. Mr. Nambiar,
we're not discussing ISIS, please. The problem is that this will require a detailed discussion. I don't have the time for that.
Yes,
we'll do it later.
Mr. Shamsir, we are part of the government in Kerala. I think you need to really improvise your knowledge. Mr. Kuti, who's the minister there, Krishnam Kuti is part of the government. And second thing, Kumaraswamy had written a letter to a good friend called Pinarayi Vijayan. We have shared enough stage with you, Mr. Vijayan. Mr. Vijayan, you need to really tell Mr. Shamsir to tone down rather than accusing and abusing Mr. S.D. Kumaraswamy and Mr. Yediyurappa. This is not playing linguistic politics. Neither Yediyurappa nor Kumaraswamy was playing linguistic politics. It was a request. If at all there is nothing like this, we would just say by folded hands, thank you very much, Mr. Pinarayi Vijayan. You have done a great job because this is needed for promotion, protection and propagation of harmony between
Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Shamsir as well as Mr. Nambiar, let us hope.
Mr. Tanveer has said it very rightly. If there is no change, everybody will accept it. But if there is a change, then there is a major challenge.
Okay, let us hope there is no change and this story does not turn into a linguistic battle between Kerala and Karnataka. Mr. Shamsir says that no such thing is happening. We are going to leave this discussion tonight by believing what Mr. Shamsir is saying. Thank you very much to all of you all. Let's shift to another poll bound state, a state which is politically in the news. This is the state of Uttar Pradesh, where every day some statement is now being made. It's a big contest. In February 2022, the state assembly elections are going to be held. But you know what is happening? Mayawati says she'll go it alone. Akhilesh says he will go it alone. Congress has no other option but to go it alone. There is Owaisi who says he'll fight on 100 seats. Then you've got the Nishat party, then Peace party, all sorts of parties who will also be in contest. So Mayawati versus Akhilesh versus Congress versus Owaisi versus others, all want to do just one thing: defeat Yogi Adityanath. So will the divided colors of UP's opposition actually be able to defeat Yogi Adityanath? Who makes a more compelling case? I want to introduce at this moment Mr. Ghanshyam Tiwari, spokesperson of the Samajwadi Party, Sudhindra Bhadoria, leader of the BSP, and Mr. PKD Nambiar continues to be with us. Mr. Bhadoria, I want to begin with you. The BSP chief today said that she will not have an alliance with anyone. This is her stated position for a very long time. We have seen that after what happened in 2019, she has maintained that she'll fight or contest the elections alone. What does this do to an index of opposition unity in the state of Uttar Pradesh?
Well, you see, we are having elections in Uttar Pradesh in the background of the last 1.5 years more particularly, which has hit the humanity and the society and Indian people at large, and more particularly in Uttar Pradesh, people have suffered because of the COVID-19. Now, people in Uttar Pradesh want a stable government. They want a government, a time-tested leader. Mayan Mayawati ji has been Chief Minister 4 times. And even in the past 30 years, if you see, while she has been 4 times Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, we have contested alone and on 1 or 2 occasions with some other parties. Now, other parties have also contested, particularly the BJP as well as the Samajwadi Party. Now, it is for the people of Uttar Pradesh to decide. And in the context of the index of opposition unity, I would like to know where was the opposition unity in Bengal? Did the people of Bengal not choose one party against many others contesting? And I want to also preempt the question which everybody says that this is the B team because they are not doing, or that is the B team. Look, I want to say this, that in Bengal, the Congress party and the communists who are supposed to be fighting against the BJP, they saw to it that they fight against Mamata Banerjee also. And yet they are a secular party. How do we become a party which is not committed to secularism and the Constitution of India? Therefore, we will fight alone, we will win it.
Yeah, but then see, the point is when you compare yourself with a West Bengal, the contest was very clearly between the BJP and the Trinamool Congress. The Congress may have some great vision about their victory or even the left, but the contest clearly was between these two players, and that is how it happened. Unfortunately, Mr. Bhadoria, in the state of Uttar Pradesh, it seems that the contest is between the SP and the BJP and not really the BSP. The BSP is not visibly seen as contesting, at least as of this moment.
Well, let me answer this question by saying this, that maybe in the Lutyens' Delhi, it may not be seen. But as far as the people of Uttar Pradesh are concerned, and more particularly the marginalized sections of Uttar Pradesh are concerned, even in the Panchayat elections, let me tell you, nobody got a clear majority. Not even the Samajwadi Party or nor did the BJP. They won about 700 seats. We won around 400 seats, and we have also another 100 people who have joined thereafter. And let me say that in no Panchayat elections we have contested where we have, contested for the Panchayat President's post also. Here, this time, I want to just bring in one more incident. 2004-5, when Mulayam Singh was the Chief Minister, he contested all and he won massive Panchayat elections. But in 2007, when the assembly elections were held, Bahujan Samaj Party
got a simple majority
convincingly in Uttar Pradesh. And this time again, I will prove these pundits wrong,
Okay.
and you will see in Uttar Pradesh there will be a BSP government.
Interesting. Last time around, there was a Brahmin plus Dalit combination and social engineering. What is really happening in the BSP this time around? We are curious. But
You will
Ghanshyam,
know it at the time of elections. You will know when we go to poll, well before it. But this is at the moment of COVID time. Do you think during COVID times, what is the priority? We are facing the people where they are suffering in the districts, in the villages, elsewhere. So therefore, we are concentrating on this, and with a sense of proportion, we are working towards elections also. We are not putting everything in the elections and getting the people also making them unsafe, and so the larger society.
Ghanshyam Tiwari, I think that's a dig at you and the BJP. That you're not, Mayawati as well as the BSP is not risking everything. They're saving up their energy and their strategy for the Vidhan Sabha elections.
Well, good evening, Sanket, and good evening to my fellow panelists and your viewers. One thing is this framing that it is Yogi or BJP versus all. Really, the framing in Uttar Pradesh is it is a model of terror of BJP and Adityanath versus the people. People want to rout this government, who has terrorized civil society, freedom of expression, dismissed people who have died, dismissed sensitivities to families, and right now, as the panchayat elections and polls happened, terrorized those who were elected, not letting democracy prevail. So there is a very clear anger against a government that doesn't respect the opportunities of progress, be it employment, be it the
No, but then Mr. Tiwari, which political party is going to tap into this anger or feel the people's pulse? That's the point that I'm trying to make. Because as of this moment, it appears everybody wants to do the same. You want the same piece of cake or piece of the pie.
We have stood steadfast with our work, our leadership, our commitment कि सुख दुख में साथ निभाया है, सुख दुख में साथ निभाएंगे. This is our commitment. काम बोलता है is our commitment. And to Uttar Pradesh people, we want to say कि वाकई कंस राज जाने वाले हैं, अच्छे दिन आने वाले हैं. This kind of government where anybody would be put behind bars, in jail, women will be put behind bars was known in Kans Raj. That is the story from Mathura. So clearly this story is going to change, and I think people will vote, but clearly Samajwadi Party is seen as the natural party that is routing Bharatiya Janata Party, and
not the BSP.
The leadership of, well, it is for people to decide. As a spokesperson of Samajwadi Party, I see a very strong
I know
आने वाले हैं from people grassroots that people want a leadership, young leader like Akhilesh Yadav.
What I note over here, Mr. Tiwari, is this certain amount of softness towards your political opposition to BSP, and obviously you're trading all your guns at the BJP. It's very clear. That's a clear strategy. You don't want
softness. I mean, one is that Sudhindra Bhadoria ji is a very senior leader. I highly respect him. Second, it's not about softness. My views here does not change the ground reality. My views emerge from ground reality.
What is the ground reality?
Ground reality is that people see Akhilesh Yadav as a leader who will take Uttar Pradesh forward and really steer this state whose development will take India forward. So this is the
And don't you think you could have achieved all of this better had you all been together? Or has the Mahagathbandhan formula failed in UP, and thus you have learnt all your lessons, everyone?
We believe that Akhilesh Yadav's leadership, both as Chief Minister as a leader who brings people together and speaks about vision for the state, is formidable. And in that spirit, we believe that we can do it with alliance of small parties or smaller forces in Uttar Pradesh.
Mr. Nambiar, how do you look at this situation for an OAC to now come into the fray on 100 seats, for the BSP and SP having tried to come together, but that clearly did not work out for either of them, for the Congress and SP to try and that formulation not working? This formulation, where does this put the BJP? Is there a generic assumption in the BJP that a very fractured and divided opposition will be naturally advantage BJP? Because that's a very dangerous assumption.
Firstly, if there is a fractured opposition, that clearly says that the dominance and the very popularity of the Yogi Adityanath as the Chief Minister. If you really look at the UP politics as a whole, on the one side, only one national party is really active there, that is BJP, the ruling party. Rest all is a family parties, whether it is Samajwadi Party or a Mayawati, or for that matter to the new entry into the in the UP politics is the OIC. So these factors, the divided opposition will definitely give a much bigger boost to the BJP. There is no doubt about it. But these people cannot even sit together on each other because they are all power hungry politicians. They all have one aim other than just being a chief ministership. There is nothing called as a common agenda of whether it is for the Bua or for the Batija. There is no common agenda. It's the only thing is that how can we get into the power. But whereas on the other side, the Yogi Adityanath commands a huge respect. When sometimes people say that like
Mr. Nambiar, this will be put to test in the election. The point is that there was great resentment against him also. You may not agree, but obviously there were very strong feelers from the ground that that people were not happy within your own political party. Even now, you may be contesting these elections under his leadership, but what is going to happen after the elections, one does not know.
So the
somehow the BJP has tried to keep the flock together. There is resentment.
The politics in a national party like a BJP is very dynamic. You can't say that it is forever. The Yogi Adityanath will be the chief minister of UP forever. That is because it's not a family party. Neither JP Nadda will be the president for this party forever. No, that doesn't happen in a democratic party like BJP.
Okay.
But on the other side, you will also have to appreciate from a Bimaru state, today UP is the second largest economy. You also need to appreciate in the 4 years from the GSDP.
Okay, now this will have to be put to a big debate. This point.
I have to say something on
Mr. Bhaduria, very quickly, yes.
Well, I am saying that when Mayawati was the chief minister, the development index showed that we had 9% growth in Uttar Pradesh. It was neither there during Mulayam Singh's time nor there during Akhilesh's time. And least to say about the BJP, where nationally and in Uttar Pradesh the economy is in shambles and people are suffering the worst in Uttar Pradesh. Therefore, I think that on the development index, welfare index and rule of law, when Mayawati is head above shoulders over all other contestants in Uttar Pradesh.
In Lucknow, that was the major development of Mayawati. The major development was of creating her own statues in Lucknow. Or
you please take care of Gujarat, where you put in 4,000 crores in one statue, and when we have Ambedkar, we have OBC leaders and Dalit leaders. This is what you do. I think
okay, I'm going to have to come in here.
Maximum money for
Mr. Bhaduria, Mr. Nambiar, as well as Mr. Tiwari, I'm going to have to take a short break at this moment. But remember, elections in Uttar Pradesh are in February 2022, and scenes like these are only going to happen. In fact, they've only just begun. Good night and goodbye.